you did not tell me that I was supposed to wear underwear, and now these burlap culottes you gave me are chafing. Hey, Pantaloons, back again for what will sort of be the final installment in terms of like sort of raw history and interview stuff, okay, for our 20th anniversary celebration. Again, if you have not, if you're new to the channel and you haven't liked or subscribed, please do so down below this video in the description. And, you know, this has been a fun project. I am bummed that we're sort of nearing the end of it. But I am excited about what we're doing today. This is going to be a video interview, a Zoom interview with Dustin Ragland, who played drums in Dr. Pants basically from 2006 to 2012 or so. Dustin is one of the smartest people I've ever met. He is, as you'll hear in the video, he was always in demand as a drummer, whether he was in Dr. Pants or not. He was a great drummer when we started, and then he became even better, certainly within the time that we worked together. And one thing you'll hear me say in the interview, and it really is true, is that working with people like him and Kenneth, and then first Aaron Vasquez on bass, and then Devin Donaldson on bass, having those guys in the band and knowing what they could do, that was it had a huge impact on the music that I chose to write, and ergo the music that Dr. Pants made. Most of the things from the Cusack Loggins EP and most everything from The Trip, a lot of that music was what it was because I knew that I could take it to Kenneth and to Dustin and to Aaron and Devin, and I could say, play this, and they could play it and play it well. And so it can't be understated what an impact those guys made on Dr. Pants sort of becoming what it was and has been. You heard from Kenny a couple days ago. Now we're going to hear from Dustin. So here we go.
So I guess I just want to start off by like asking you what you remember. What do you remember about sort of getting involved with Dr. Pants? Like, what do you remember about sort of your way into the whole thing?
Man, that's a good question. I mean, the like process of starting, I don't remember if like an impetus like conversation, or there wasn't a conversion moment. Like it was like this, all the light, like that kind of thing. It was more, I remember early on getting like the big book of everything, like, and it's just, and it was so cool. It was like, I felt like I was walking into a stream, which was really neat, of like, there's a stream of folks that have been doing this, and obviously like built around yourself. And two, like my limited theory would be like, my limited music theory knowledge would just be like, okay, I really want to step up to, I could follow a chart, but like just be able to really follow figures and things like that. I remember those things being super nerve-wracking early on. But yeah, the like starting, it's weird because it just feels like it started in media res a little bit of just, oh, okay, now we're doing this stuff.
Right.
Yeah, that's kind of what I remember from the beginning, for sure. So
yeah, I feel like maybe the very first thing was like, I mean, you played on like about half the songs on the Gardening in a Tornado album.
Maybe that was it.
Yeah, because
that makes sense, over at Brian's house,
at Brian Bergman's, and we had done like I had started about half the songs with another drummer, with Dean Brown at Josh Banner's house. And then like I kind of wanted to shift gears a little bit anyway for various reasons. And then, you know, it turned out like that Josh had met Susanna and he was going to move away and all that kind of thing anyway. And so like so we switched it over to Brian's, and I had you and Quint come in and do the rhythm section stuff on the rest of the tracks. And then it came to the point where it's like, okay, we got to put this record out. I had Kenneth on board already. Like Kenny had been hanging around for a few years, and we had done like some shows with Dean on drums and Kenny on guitar, and like then sort of just this rotating cast of bass players. Like there was just like a different bass player every show. Like we didn't play that many shows. We played like, you know, half a dozen shows in, you know, 2 or 3 years or something like that. But like everyone had a different bass player. And so, Yeah, yeah, I forget. I kind of sometimes I forget about the big book. Like well, because nowadays, like, and for those at home, like we're talking about a physical notebook binder with
Exactly.
charts in it and CDRs that have the songs on
Yeah.
them,
Oh
and
yeah.
because nowadays it's like, oh, I just throw all that in Dropbox and send
You pull it up
somebody
on
a
your
link.
iPad and click it over.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
right.
mean that's yeah.
Yeah, it was a different time. It was
It was. I mean, it was like
2006.
2004. Was
Right.
that
Well,
what? Yeah.
it was heading into 2005, I'm sure,
Okay.
when
Okay.
we
That's what. Yeah.
were tracking, and then like, but the record, I mean, I didn't get the record out and get everything done with it until towards the end of 2006,
Yeah.
and
Oh, okay. Yeah.
pretty much the whole time that you were involved with Dr. Pants, you were also sort of, you were sort of the full-time drummer for Charlie Hall, and so you're sort of always juggling that. and
Yeah.
and so for a while, like, I had, there was another drummer, Chris Kelso, who like sometimes would come and play dates when you couldn't play them. But then by the time we got to like Cusack logins in like 2008, like, Chris wasn't really doing much with us anymore.
Yeah.
um and then I'd be curious as to hear what you remember about recording Cusack logins, because you were the engineer and we tracked it at 611 Charlie's old space.
Yeah.
Well, I asked Kenny about it, and he was like, well, I just remember it just happened. It just was really fast.
Yeah.
He's like, I did like 5 takes of 3 songs, and like the whole thing was done. I was like, well, yeah, for you it was done, but um what what do you remember about making that record? Anything?
I mean, it was definitely during the time where downtown Oklahoma City had the like crazy cricket infestation, like biblical cricket
Oh,
infestation,
wow.
and there were times in 611 where those would just like collect in corners and the craziness. So I remember always like thinking while we were tracking, like, I hope we don't have one of the cricket infestations while that's going on. And I mean, it's a similar thing of like, I think it felt like the band, even though we had some of the in and out things, it felt really like that was the band doing a thing that was the band. And
Hmm.
it really had, yeah, I don't know, like where you make the transition from a project that it's still really dependent on like your singular vision and kind of supporting the songwriting that you're doing, that you, David, are doing. But as a band, it really felt like we kind of were just all on the same boat for that. And like,
Yeah, maybe more
yeah,
so than for any other record that has been
yeah,
released
totally.
under Dr. Pants name. Like, even on the trip, like when we started it, we were still the same band
Yeah,
that we were with Cusack Loggins, but then by the time we got to sort of the release show for side 1 or whatever, Aaron had bailed on us.
sure.
Um
Yeah.
but to the point where, like, both, I think Kendall and I played all the bass parts on the trip side too, because there wasn't
Yeah.
an official bass player. And then
Yeah.
finally, when we got to side 3, Devin was already sort of in the mix and doing
Yeah.
the deal.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's true. Like, Cusack Loggins probably more than any of the other projects felt like that was something we did sort of do as a band. One, and especially because, like, I mean, you were engineering, there literally wasn't anyone else,
Yeah.
in the process until we got to mastering. And I think I ended up hiring Paul Colley to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like, until we got there, like, it was just the 4 of us working on that thing.
The process of recording that, like the actual being there and like memories in the room were always the 611, the space, which had a storefront that opened up to Broadway in downtown Oklahoma City, was always, even engineering wise, you're stressed a little bit about folks coming in and out, and in that weird place that I was at as an engineer, like where I just didn't have a home. Like I, lived in at that stage, it would have been the duplex, I think.
Right.
And so there wasn't really a good place to track with a band, especially a rock band.
Yeah.
And so doing that in a business at different times of the day and evening, and then getting all of our schedules. I mean, the challenges of always being working musicians, I think, and that's probably changed since even then, 10, 12-ish years ago. But the challenges of being a working musician then is all the schedule balancing, like you're talking about. And at that stage too, where I was, it had been around about the time I was getting married and just kind of figuring that whole other level of existence out in the middle of that process, in the middle of all the other things that were going on, when all of us were wearing like 20 different hats at that time and didn't necessarily even have like teaching roles where we can really center our lives around in a lot of ways.
Right, sure.
It's nice because like thinking back on that, even the craziness of that, like I kind of in ways share Kenny's memory, even though I was there a lot more
Yeah.
and doing, hands in all these different parts. It was like, it felt so fast and so efficient. And it felt like a story that old bands tell about, yeah, we went into Ocean Way and we only had, $10,000 to record our record because that was cheap back in the day, whatever.
Right.
And
Yeah.
we did it in the midnight to 5 a.m. shift and recorded 20 punk songs, and that's that kind of thing.
Sure.
That wasn't literally it, but it still felt like that sort of thing where there was still some looseness and there wasn't necessarily even, because it was an EP, it wasn't necessarily as much ambition behind it of like, okay, this is an album statement that we're making. It was more like, we have this configuration now, let's get that on record and then we'll see what happens next after that, which was fun. It's just it's in the life of a band and even in the life of like an adult, it's still the place where you're not quite in the immaturity, but you're not having all the responsibilities yet.
Right.
And musically, that really comes out on like the fun of, particularly, if I were John Cusack, and how much that becomes a live staple, how much it was cool to like be playing that and then also finally have it on a record versus
totally
just playing it live all the time. So
yeah, I agree. And that was just so much fun, like putting sort of the almost like the Muppet chorus kind of at the end of that track and like having Casey come in and do like a take of her singing in her opera vocal style and stuff like that. It was starting in 2008. That's when Casey and I went on the road full time to do her stuff, and so like that was sort of another like thing in the mix in terms of scheduling. Was like, okay, well, we can't play Dr. Pants shows in Oklahoma City if I'm not in Oklahoma City either. And so like, so then, but at the same time, like at some point, like I felt like, we were able to at least get in somewhat of a groove and play, at least for us, fairly often, once a month or once every couple months. After a point, we didn't really do Galileo anymore. Are there any, like, I guess, there are certainly things that we did, I'm sure, that are that stick out to you. Like, are there, like, in terms of moments that you remember, like it could be shows, it could be whatever, like, are there things that you remember that you have particular, like, that you kind of would consider like favorite Dr. Pants moments for you at all?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was thinking about that even coming in tonight, like just the memories that stood out from those things. And a lot of it is like some of the more obvious shows, which I'll maybe tag on the end, that were just kind of like, that's peculiar, but the VCDs ones sort of feel like a cluster in a way. Like I remember doing some VCD shows like after Thunder games and you're waiting for the game to get down. And that feels relatively late in the process. Like that's 2011 or 12,
Right, sure.
But it, like the main memories, like one of the biggest chunks is honestly from rehearsals. Like for some reason that really stays with me, of going to the rehearsal space over off Classen.
My father-in-law's office. Yeah,
exactly. And that was really like, I don't know, for some reason it felt like it was a safe place to really dig into the songs, to make a lot of mistakes with them, to learn a lot of material for these shows that we'd often have like, 3-hour sets for. And that stuff felt really, for some reason, that's really kind of warm just to see how that stuff unfolded. And that's one of the memories that really sticks with me the most. And, we're talking about it like a physical, again, book of music that like you're tearing through, trying not to rip out any pages, but also like flipping, what song are we going to next? And that sort of thing. And I've still, to my weird shame as a drummer, never had like 2 drum sets. So I'd always bring like some ersatz drum kit together for practice. And then realized after a while that my practice with like 1 tom wouldn't stand up when I'm now playing with 2 toms in a live set, and rethinking my parts on the fly, going like, oh gosh, this would be a lot better if I just practiced with 2 toms. And the whole like practice the way you actually want to play doesn't feel so preachy when you're experiencing those sort of things. So that, I really do have a lot of really fun, warm memories of rehearsal. And it's a feeling that honestly sticks with like doing rehearsals now, which are much, much more rare. With doing anything with Bo or occasionally with Hotel Nights, it's like going to rehearsal every time because as we know, like being parents and having different kinds of musical jobs, when rehearsal time rolls around at the end of your day, after you've gotten the kids to bed, and a lot of times it's like, oh man, gosh, I've got to go to rehearsal.
Yeah.
And then I leave it and I'm like, I'm glad we did that. Like every
Sure.
single time. And I have a lot of memories of that, just driving back down Classen and going home, from
Yeah.
that sort of thing.
Yeah. The other day, Kenny said, he actually said something similar about some of the gigs. Like, he would, of course, he's been for years and years and years, he's just been, Mr. Hardcore, like pawn shop guy who's just, putting in all the hours every week at the pawn shop. And, he would he'd be on his way to the gig, like, oh, I'm tired. I want to do this. And then but then he'd get there and before the set, we'd be hanging out, we'd have a drink, like talking and then, by the time it was all done, he was like, oh, really glad I got to do that, so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There was one at, it was Picasso's or I feel like it was either Galileo was changing or Picasso was kind of like starting shows back up. It felt like some kind of liminal state of Galileo's, which was, just an institution as a restaurant. Casey obviously had like all these wonderful ties there as a musician and server and all this stuff, like really cool ties there. And you yourself too, as well. Like seeing that transition happen was bittersweet in some ways, but I remember one particular show where afterwards we just like hung out in the kind of back corner room. It had some couches and stuff like that, and just got drinks and hung out. And that's, again, one of my favorite show memories is literally us just like, oh, we played a show and now we're going to hang out.
Right.
And not rush off to the next thing.
Yeah.
But it also felt like something where there was a period of like, it's hard to explain for folks that are embedded in OKC now, maybe the past 10, 15 years. But prior to that 10, 15 years, the things that were culturally significant, especially when it comes to music and live music and original live music, it was pretty rare. And it was, and so that kind of stuff, to be able to kind of straddle that period feels like a real big honor. And then, of course, there's some of the, I remember a show really particularly playing at the Wedge, I think, in the morning.
Yeah.
And we played like in the back corner, like 4 people,
yes,
a full rock band playing in a corner that's like it would not be, COVID safe for sure. But it was like that sort of thing was just, we could barely move. And we're all like, corner. And I remember that being a lot of fun just because we were like, can we do this? Why not?
That was called the I Spy Wedgie in Your Pants party. It came about because of a whole thing on Twitter of like Elena from the Wedge and Ferris from the Spy and me all having a conversation about pizza for breakfast. And
that's right.
And so we ended up putting this whole event together that was like built around pizza for breakfast. And so like the Wedge created new breakfast pizzas for the event. And then we played and of course, Ferris was there, whatever. And like, and then Coop came and
that's right.
And that was something else. Well, and then we did at least one more of those where we got quote wedged in to that corner at the Wedge and like just create like, and I mean we had done it once, which made it I guess easier the next time, but like it's still funny that
absolutely
played in this cramped little space. Kenny and I talked about that a little bit, and we sort of, as we jumped to there from, talking about going and playing at, in Jenny Lawson's bathroom in Texas in 2012. And, when we saw that bathroom, we were like, oh, we can totally do this. Like, because we had played in smaller spaces than that already.
Her bathroom was actually bigger than that section of the Wedge.
It really
Not
was.
The Wedge, but just
it
like that section of it was totally bigger.
Bigger than that corner of the Wedge for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know what you remember. I remember feeling like you were, you were stressed out on that trip, like, and not in a way that it ruined it or anything like that. But like, I remember thinking like, I can tell that like Dustin's eager to get home and you know, not feel like he is, you know, away or whatever. But at the same time, like, I mean, I felt like, you know, I felt like it went really well, and I have good memories of like, I think you and I listened to the David Foster Wallace "This Is Water" on the way back, because when you were trying to find a feed, a radio feed, like through your phone or whatever, to listen to the Thunder game, but we couldn't find that for a while, and so then we listened to "This Is Water," and then we ended up finding the Thunder game or whatever. But while Kenny and Devin sat in the back seat watching a movie on a computer or whatever that they rented from a red box, like at the McDonald's, or whatever.
The stuff that we had to do to like actually watch movies and shows back in the day, like when you're traveling. And but at that particular trip, I remember driving down, and that first night we actually had a night where we stayed in Austin. We played like the next kind of midday or
next day,
afternoon at Ginny's house. And remember being down in Austin, and we went out to South by Southwest, which was happening at the same time. But we just went and hung out like at some random thing at South by Southwest. And that was really, it was fun because it was kind of nice to be down there for South by Southwest, but also not have to deal with the headache of any of it.
Totally.
And then we drove down in the mountains, you know, the next day, or the hill country the next day. And I can't remember if I had at that point gone like, okay, I'm gonna have to peel back from playing, and that kind of coded.
I don't know that we had that. Yeah, I don't know that we had that conversation for another couple months.
Yeah, maybe that was it,
by the time, because by the time we got to like August or September of 2012, like that was, we did a gig, we did an ACM back to school show, and we pulled the trick where like after some song you just like passed out
Yep, I remember,
on stage, and then I was like, anybody play the drums? And of course we had, you know, our plant Josh Daffron in the audience. But yeah, I feel I feel like we hadn't had that moment yet when we did the Texas trip. But of course, and then, you know, the next year with Josh, and Kyle Bennett in place of Kenny, because Kenny couldn't get away from the pawn shop. We actually did go down and play a couple of unofficial South by Southwest things, and it was it was a different experience, you know, like lugging your gear, you know, to some, like from some outside weird parking place to over on something on 6th Street where it just closed off, and you know, and like just strategically trying to figure out like where can we park, unload the gear that's close to the venue, and then I go find parking after that. And that's a whole other deal. Playing in a bathroom in a house in the hill country was a piece of cake by comparison.
Not so bad. Man, and especially like that's, I think, to that period like of transitioning out of being with Dr. Pants, like it was weird because at that point I was still traveling pretty much full time with Charlie for the next couple of years. But I think there were also the extra stresses of that. That's where it kind of became apparent, both the ACM work and then trying to do as much freelance recording stuff, because we moved in to the house right around that time.
Right.
So I had the studio of this place, you know, that's around. Having that all around and trying to kind of feel the transition from traveling full time with Charlie, which was kind of the main thing that all the other stuff could orbit around when it comes to like trying to piece together the financial picture, the time picture of being a musician at that stage. And that big kind of sun was dying and collapsing in on itself. Not that dramatically, but just kind of like that's drying up and we're not traveling as much. And, you know, we're married and we're just at different places. And so there's times both with Charlie's band, there's times with several projects, even just doing around that time where there was recording stuff or traveling where like I didn't know how to express the stress of those things out loud as well, because I kind of felt embarrassed about it. Like, it's this, you know, it's a problem of, I'm getting to still play music for 75% of what I'm doing or whatever. And that's a hard thing to be upset about in some ways, but it's also a thing that, you know, for every musician, you have this, like, it's not a love-hate relationship. It really is love, but it's a thing that you do feel abandoned a lot of the times by playing music because of how it situates and everything around us, and the way our society values that, whether it's monetarily or just, spiritually valuing that in a broad sense. So, yeah, so there's definitely times when I would kind of like, I look back on those things and wish I either would have just been more outgoing about it, because I'm also not a very like
Sure.
self-disclosing person in that way. Um, Once I feel like the levee break and I'm like in this place of honesty, then it's usually like, oh, I'd love to talk about this for hours, But
Right.
that initial threshold of that, because I would get embarrassed of, my feelings in a lot of ways of that, or get embarrassed of like, man, this is gonna be a hard conversation, in some degree, because this is, anytime you're spending that much time with other people, you legitimately have friendships, and you legitimately have things that you share that are the best kind of stuff, where the corny version of that is you get in a room together and you don't necessarily need to talk all that much. But for
Sure.
musicians, it's a way for us to get in a room together and we do conversation. Again, it sounds corny, but when it comes back around to it, speaking of David Foster Wallace kind of thing of taking what seems really trite, and realizing that there's so much profundity and depth in that. There's a lot of that within music as a conversation between people and between human beings. And so that stuff, you know, when you don't have good words to say for those sort of things and you try to bring that out in the way you play with one another, there's always those periods where it's awkward and tough, and saying things more directly and out loud. I've tried to be better about that after going through a season of that, but it took a lot of time of experiencing that from this job, kind of drying up, and then this thing trying to do more recording projects and do less, playing out, that kind of thing. So
Yep.
it was wacky. Yeah.
Yeah, I do remember. Oh, the other thing I remember, and I've got it on video because I did a video capture when we did the webcast from Jenny's house. But like at
Oh
the
yeah.
end of the last song, at the end of My Pants or whatever, like because you had been hidden, like you're kind of hidden. You were kind of hidden
Yeah.
back there. You were sort of like almost sort of around the corner at the back of this bathroom
Yeah. Yeah.
with your drum kit, and so that at the very end, you kind of like you got your crash or your ride or something off of the stand, and so you just come up and you're like hitting it like this, like, and you're up with me and the
Yeah.
camera,
I remember that. Yeah.
and that was pretty fun.
Yeah.
And it's great. It's almost like there are a number of people who have been sort of involved with Dr. Pants over the years. There's like one moment like that where like they're just
Yeah.
remember when so and so did that, and
Yeah.
which is
Exactly.
great. I mean, and those are the moments where it's like, I I like that because I feel like it's like, okay, those are the moments where the people who aren't me, who aren't necessarily driving the train creatively, there's a moment where they capture the spirit of the thing that I've been going for the whole time,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's always really cool. So I guess you were still in technically you were in until I don't know. I mean, we finished the trip side 3
Yeah.
before you stepped away, and then like when of course your drum tracks on the trip were all done in like 2 marathon days. I don't know if you
Yeah.
remember
I
that.
remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, that was impressive, and to this day I'm impressed by, by what we did and what you did, especially. But like, but then yeah, then heading into like the end of 2012, like Kendall and I were still working on
Yeah.
kind of finishing out the last of that. Um, and then we did, and then with Josh and the band, we did the Doctor Who single like
Yeah.
in at your place in the
Yeah.
room
Yeah.
where
I
you
remember
are,
that. Yeah.
the room where you are right now, which was, I remember that. I remember that being a lot of fun. I remember it being fun just for all of us to be there working with you. But I guess I don't know. I don't know if it was more relaxed for you because it was like, okay, well, I only have to play the one role or whatever.
Yeah. No, I remember that session as being like, I one remember Kenneth coming in and just remembering how much I enjoyed his guitar playing, like
Yeah.
being away from it for a minute, and then coming back in, just realizing like, man, that in like the OKC music scene, I don't know that Kenny ever gets the credit he's due,
Oh,
in the
sure.
sense of like, I mean, no, I know that he doesn't get the credit that he's due, partially because of like, you think of like a working class kind of like musician. I don't mean that in like a class thing, but like the image of that. And I'm thinking about that because I think people really relate to that, to Van Halen, who's obviously on everybody's minds right now.
Sure.
And that, I picture that with Kenny completely different than Eddie Van Halen, of course, but in a way that like you have this person that's like so unassuming, doesn't seek any glory for themselves, comes in and plays some of the like absolutely most bonkers guitar things, and you can ask him to make sounds, you know, for Doctor Who specifically in that context too, who are famous for all these really cool like soundtrack elements that are forward thinking and obviously have been a huge part of British sound and sonic history for forever.
Yeah.
And I remember asking him just to play the weird things and just kind of being like, oh my gosh, like again, but
Yeah.
partially because I could focus on that one role and just be like, all I'm doing is listening to your sounds and I'm still getting blown away by that. And it did feel really good to feel like there's some full circleness to that, because you do have the like, you do have the awkwardness of like, no, we were in a band together, now we're not. And for a lot of the times, at least for especially our generation growing up, when a band breaks up, it's some like dramatic, acrimonious thing.
Right.
In a lot of the cases, I remember having those conversations with my parents one time when they were talking about like, I don't know, some band breaking up that they didn't know. It was like Sunday Real Estate or something. And they were like, I don't know who that is. But for me, it felt like the world. And then they got back together and then they broke up again. And then they got back together. And then they didn't do anything after that, you know. And they were always just kind of like, I remember having a conversation with my parents where it was like, well, were they not friends anymore? You know, those kind of things.
Right.
And so it felt really nice to come back around. And even as an engineer, I felt way more confident and like I could see a vision through. And there was, and because it was a small project, it was, you know,
Right.
just doing
Two
the track,
songs.
it was
Yeah.
like, yeah. And so that made it really discreet and doable. And that's still like the challenge of every musician, but I feel like there's a thing that when we talk about like stress and the way that I would express my frustrations and not being able to deliver what I wanted to deliver for people, whether it was as a drummer or engineer or friend or musician or husband, whatever, usually comes out and like I just try to like with the stress inside so that I don't put that on someone.
Sure.
But it ends up just creating this like cloud of, are you mad at me? Are you not mad at me? I'm like, no, I'm mad at me, but apparently I'm making it look like I'm mad at you,
Right.
you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so it was nice to have that session for that. And I really love that track still. And just,
Yeah.
or those tracks, the two tracks that we did, and just the outcome from that was really, really fun and
Yeah.
Neat to see. So
Yeah, and I remember really enjoying, you know, watching you and Josh sort of come together on the drum stuff.
Yeah.
Like that was really cool. And yeah, like, well, and Kenny, it's funny, Kenny and I were talking the other night, and he's like, when people ask me what I do like in my band or the band I'm in, it was like he's like, I don't know, I just do weird shit. Like you know, and it's funny because like he does so much more than just do weird shit, but at the same
Yeah.
time, like
Yeah.
it is remarkable kind of just the dedication he has to just taking the guitar and you know, creating, you know, doing strange things with it in a way that, you know, certainly not everybody around here does, you know, for
Yeah.
sure.
Totally.
But and I agree with you. I think that he is, yeah, in some ways, you know, in terms of sort of Oklahoma City guitar players, like he definitely, you know, I think his reputation with the people who know him is fine. I think that
Yeah.
it just needs to be bigger. You know, it just needs
For
to be,
sure, yeah.
more people need to know, you know. There were a couple shows in 2014, like I think like 2 of the 3 shows or whatever we played in 2014, you ended up playing with us because Josh wasn't available. But you know, but that was great. And you know, and then at that point, like, I mean, I took, you know, some time off from it.
Yeah.
And, you know, by the time we came back around, you know, full band Dr. Pants was, you know, I replaced half the band again because Devin had moved and Josh
Yeah.
had moved. And so there is a new sort of, you know, longish EP of stuff that's sort of in limbo from January that Jimmy played on that we haven't finished. But,
Yeah.
but I, you know, for a lot of the material, the Dr. Pants material that people know the best, you know, is all stuff that you were involved with. And so it's really cool just to know, like, well, Dustin's always going to have, like, you know, his fingerprints are going to be all over it, at least, you know, a lot of it for a long time to come, which is awesome. you were at the top of the list of like people I at least wanted to at least involve in kind of a talk about the history of Dr. Pants thing, because
Yeah.
I feel like there were a lot of years there where I felt grounded in a way, having playing with you, like, and not even just from a musical perspective, although
Sure.
but another thing Kenny and I talked about was just how great Kenny talked a lot about how great it was to sort of like have a a rhythm section or whatever that we played with consistently for
Yeah.
at least a series of years, and the
Yeah.
fact that like you start to get to know the people and know what to expect out of them and the kind of stuff they're going to do, especially in like long jams on My Pants and things like that. um
Yeah.
but also just like I feel like you were very much sort of just in terms of like a personal sort of grounding force during that time, that like for whatever reason, like it was playing with you and just knowing that you were going to be there at the gigs and the rehearsals and the whatever else, like it was a taming force to my various neuroses, that the kind of stuff that gets in my the where I get in my own way in terms of actually making creative things happen. Like it was just a really positive thing for you to be around. It was like, okay, but Dustin's going to be there, so everything's going to be okay. Like,
Yeah.
and
I mean,
and
it's
I hope
yeah.
that's not a weird thing to say, but I think it's important
No.
to say it and be like, it really, for multiple reasons, it really mattered to me for all those
Yeah.
years that you were around. And it took a year or two, but like once we sort of got in the groove of sort of like having you and having Kenny and Aaron around, like I was able to sort of like start to write for the things that I knew you guys could do and the strengths
Yeah.
that you had. And that that was in some ways like that was really creatively rewarding experience to be like, okay, like you know I can write Booty Fest or whatever, where like it has a couple time signature changes and it's got this strange form thing that happens, and like but these guys, they're going to be able to handle it, I know they are.
Yeah.
And so and then Gas Planet later on after that, and whatever else. Um
Yeah.
but
I mean,
yeah.
Gas Planet remains one of my kind of like favorite all-time tracks that we worked on. Just
Yeah.
it felt like it captured. I mean, a lot of stuff on the trip did this. Robot Spiders probably did this too, to some degree, of like just getting everything that had built in conceptually to the band and it presenting that in a way. It's one of the like, it's so hard to quantify, and it's impossible kind of doing music criticism on your own music, but where you're writing, the writer's like going, this band has matured, and sometimes that just means the band gets more boring and shaves out the edges. But
Right.
it felt like that's not really going to happen with the makeup of like, hey, a three-sided, mega opus
Oh,
here,
right. Yeah,
you
yeah,
know, with all kinds of concepts, but again, so many different the stew of everybody coming together. Yeah, still remains really special because like, talking to about like Kenny and the uniqueness that he brings, and that it also isn't something like you said that you can pigeonhole him as like, oh yeah, that's the guy that does the thing that's like,
yeah.
and
Right.
that's
Yeah.
it. It's someone who also can speak the language that you're bringing in terms of a songwriter, where you have all the influences that my favorite thing maybe about Dr. Pants and like the summary, and just as you were talking about is kind of like popping in my brain, is that it never felt like the band was reactive to what was going on musically around it.
Mm.
And that's the thing that I think means that it gets understood differently as time goes on, and in ways where people will connect with that and feel like they maybe missed out on something in some ways.
Right.
And a lot of people were around for so much of it and dancing during My Pants and getting donuts thrown at them. But it's like um, or dancing during Bug House or whatever, and all
Right.
that kind
Yeah.
of stuff that was a staple of those shows, and especially even at VCDs, of
Right.
having, maybe one person who'd had too much that was there and we didn't even know, and it was like, okay, cool, there's somebody's dancing, and then friends to take care of them, and same with Galileo's Picasso, So,
Yeah.
but I have to say, like the way that the band because it's combining the stuff of like whether it's the Zappa influences, whether it's stuff that's more about telling like a story or something that's funny or something that is musically really complex and is built around like a really interesting music figure, those kind of things that songwritery type bands don't always have because they don't always have like the caliber of musical skill that you brought to it, and then the people that you would have around you, like you're saying, to write for that stuff. And that's the thing that it just made it feel like it wasn't ever, oh, this is a band that belongs to this scene. Instead, you belong like to the larger OKC musical scene, and it's tougher to be that now because you are trying to, in so many ways, it's more visible what bands are doing to market themselves because it's very obvious what they can do on social media and whatnot. And this was something that we fell into that weird hole where, yeah, there's social media and stuff,
Right.
but it wasn't, it was just ancillary to being a band. You had that stuff because you were doing stuff and you told people about it. Cool.
Yeah.
You know, and there's MySpace and Facebook and all that. But it didn't feel like you needed to brand all those things necessarily ahead of time. And it's not that it's bad that that's happening now. It's just a different time. And I'm grateful that we were in that phase of it. And, you know, it's funny to hear you trying to talk about writing for the band and stuff like that, because I always felt like for that band, more so than for what Charlie was doing, which we're not writing complex music in that world, and any other kind of ancillary things. Sometimes with student film, there was some stuff that was really more musically complex.
I always
But it
forget
also
that you
was
played with
something,
them.
yeah, and it was, and that was also like a peculiar situation of like, you know, coming in for somebody that played drums for a long time,
Yeah.
and then now they're playing keys and so all that stuff. And so, but that, you know, even if there's complex music there, we also did have like scene type things. It was music that was within kind of a musical world. And the cool thing about Dr. Payne's being such a eclectic thing was that it could be in a lot of worlds. It wasn't that it didn't fit, it just
Right.
that it fit in several things. And
Yeah.
so, and music, again, that was some of the most challenging things just because of the volume of it and then trying to adapt styles within a song. But it's the kind of thing that I don't know, as a early drummer, and the way that Dr. Pants music really specifically is special to this is that I remember early on playing my dad, my biological dad, who was a drummer, and he would, you know, occasionally tell me about drum things, or like I remember watching a Sting video just because I kind of liked Sting. This is like the 90s, folks. And
Sure.
so I'm like, kind of like 90s Sting, and just, it was pop music, it was out. And he was like, oh man, pay attention to that drummer, Vinny Colaiuta, who I had no idea who that
Yeah.
was. And I'm just like a 14-year-old young drummer, like clueless, trying to play rock songs because that's what I'm play, like Alice in Chains and stuff. And here's this drummer I'm paying attention to that's completely not that. It's uncool in a lot of ways. Like it was just not what cool drummers listened to, you know, at the time. And for whatever reason, that fed into a DNA where I constantly kind of came to musical crossroads of having to go, am I going to be a musician or am I going to be in a band? And Dr. Pants as a band allowed you to be both in a really unique way where you can be the musician and try the things you want to try and not be ashamed of that. It's not going to be uncool. In fact, it's only going to enhance what's going on because you have this such a unique stew of people. And so that was really the thing that if there's any other memory of it, it's that. It's like, as a musician, you could be a musician's musician. And that's not that like I was like blowing the doors off of playing drums, which is certainly not. There's plenty of times I'm just like, man, I had no idea what I was doing there. And it's a total goofball moment. And I wish I was better at this because I could hear something in my head or see something in the figure you wrote. And I'm like, oh, I'm not skilled enough to do that.
Right.
But in all of that, that kind of like weird mix of, yeah, I mean, I can play in some like trendy styles or whatnot or whatever, and feel like that's legitimate. But I also want to play these things well and musically in a way that in some genres it's just looked down upon to be too technically proficient.
Right.
And it was just such a refreshing thing to have that as a valve during that period for times when it'd be like when you're touring with one artist and you're doing the same thing over and over again, which is also beautiful in its own way, like legitimately so. But there's also great to be like, okay, I'm just going to play a freak out on my pants for 10 minutes. And this is,
Yeah.
and I'm going to like be unable to breathe at the end of it, but it's so fun. You know, that sort of thing. So that's also why I was like more in shape back then too. I mean, besides getting older, it's just like playing those songs.
Sure.
Be in
Yeah.
shape
Yeah.
more.
I don't think people it's funny how like there's a disconnect in terms of, and this is kind of, I think the last little rabbit hole I'll go down, and we need to probably
Yeah.
wrap this up. But there's a disconnect in terms of like, well, you know, people used to always, there were people who used to say like, when they once they finally came to see us play, but they maybe knew me from some other context, and they'd be like, wow, like you're totally different on stage. And I'm like, well, you know, you know, it's called performing for a reason, but like, you know, but then there are the other people who are like, they don't really understand the energy that you're expending up there. Like, I remember coming down from the stage at the end of a set at VZD's, and Rob Chrissinger puts his hand on my shoulder, and he's like, dude, what, did you like spill water on yourself? I'm like, no, that's sweat, Rob. Like, he's like,
Yeah.
really? I'm like, yeah, you know, it's hot up there. I moved around a lot. I did, you know, like, and you know, it's just funny. It's just funny the different perceptions. And I remember Kendall. He said, he's like, I realized once I saw you play with Dr. Pants that like I didn't really know you until I got to see you do that. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, that makes sense. Well, man, I really, really appreciate you taking the time to sit and do this. And again, just, you know, we'll always appreciate everything, all the stuff that
man.
you did and were involved in, and the time that you put in, and the amazing playing. And, you know, and the good news is that, yeah, everybody is still friends.
Yeah,
We do,
exactly.
you know, and once
Exactly,
COVID is
yeah.
over, hopefully maybe we'll all spend some time together again. But
You're talking about that and knowing people through live music. Gosh, it's like, it's not, again, not to be kind of corny or opportunistic to the time, but it really does. It gives you the hope for when things come back. Like, I feel like I also swung a pendulum of, I couldn't be as involved. And, you know, this again, being as a parent, it's a lot harder to do shows and go to
Yep.
shows and support other people. But there's a level of knowledge among musicians where you really only understand one another from seeing one another in those contexts. And
Yep.
yeah, and thinking back again on that time, I'm grateful that we got to do that and there wasn't a pandemic while we were doing that, because of how valuable that live music part of life was for whatever reason.
Yeah.
So and likewise too, like I'm still just a huge fan of you yourself and your vision in music, and honestly, one of the most like there's not a word integrous integrity, you know, wrapped people when it comes to music, from all those things I was talking about, realistic trends. And it's not that it's bucking that stuff either. You're not being like, you know, a jerk about it. It's really something that you're doing because it's the stuff that you love. And that's the thing that if any of us make music to do, is be like, this is what I'm interested in. This is what I love. And of course I'm reacting to things around me to some degree, but yeah, I'm nothing but grateful for those times. And yeah, I look forward to all the things that are next for sure, man.
Indeed. All right.
Cool.
Well, thank you so much. And
All right.
yeah, and Dustin
I'll tell
Ragland.
Casey
everybody.
and family home and everybody at home, you know, hello, and give
I
big,
will.
safe Zoom hugs. And
Yes.
definitely hope to see you all again soon. So
Yep. All right. Give our best to all of yours as well.
we'll do, man.
All right.
All right.
See you later.
ya.